All right, good morning. Welcome to Cafecito con Colon. Today with Mr. Jim Harvey. It's going to be a great morning and a beautiful week here in our land of enchantment. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in just a moment with our fantastic guest of honor. Better give me some more cafecito, Jim. I'll be right back.
You got it.
On this Monday morning, it's a beautiful 73 degrees in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Clear skies, and it's going to be a great day. Good morning, Betsy. Glad you joined us. And Karen, good to see you this morning. Alexandria sends a big shout out to Jim. She's excited you're here. Good morning, my dear friend Pammy Castillo L'Esperance. You all are going to love Jim Harvey's story. His lived experience, his community service, and his deep impact and knowledge about the history of the Black community. Jim, you have a whole collection, don't you? Don't you collect historical items?
I sure do.
I
sure do.
What's your favorite piece in your collection as we get started?
I think I'm leaning towards this bronze piece that I have called The Arrival of the King, which came from Benin, West Africa. It's as heavy as I don't know what, and it's sitting on my coffee table, which has a 2-inch, not a 2-inch, a 1-inch thick piece of glass on it, so it'll hold it. But it's a great piece of art, and I just love it.
Awesome. How'd you acquire that?
There's a West African merchant. When I lived in Washington, D.C., this guy would come every spring. He'd come to D.C. and he'd look me up, and he'd say, "I've got some things here that you might be interested in." And so for about 5 years, I was just, buying from him regularly. And then one year I went with him to West Africa, spent some time in Nigeria, spent some time in Benin, and, found a few more pieces, but we still stay in touch.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, look, Dr. Lawrence Roybal has joined us again this morning, and he sends a big shout out to Jim Harvey. Donna, good to see you. Denise R. Lee, thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to get you rescheduled. This week is very complicated for me, but we are going to make it happen, Denise. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties on Saturday morning, but we are going to get through it. Good morning, Sergeant Andrew Jaramillo. Thank you for being one of Albuquerque Police Department's finest. Been a real honor to stand with you on your journey of growth and service to our community. I can tell you, you've got a heart of gold, and you inspire many people with your work. And thank you for your leadership, Andrew. Good morning, Jonathan, and our county treasurer, Nancy Burst. Good to see you this morning. So let me get some links up right away this morning, and then I want to get to our dear friend who's joined us, Jim Harvey, who is going to really enrich us with his insights. But let me put up a few links here. The thing that made my blood boil this weekend, and I say that not lightly, I don't think anybody's ever heard me say that on Cafecito, but I am absolutely calling for a full investigation, and Loveless has got a lot of explaining to do for evidently profiling or allegedly profiling its mothers who were admitted to deliver their babies. And they were, as a result of being in a zip code that sat on sovereign land in our pueblos and in our Native American community, they were then instructed to be immediately separated from their babies upon birth. And I am beside myself. So if you haven't had an opportunity to see that great investigative journalism by the New Mexico In Depth, please take a look at that link I have just posted. Some other links I want to put up on a good note in terms of what New Mexico is doing. We've got additional studies that show that in the hot spots that have addressed COVID-19, we know that it appears as though that empirical data supports that act and supports that approach to the spread of the coronavirus. So let's keep up the good work in that regard. Are my links posting up? Let me see. Jim, do you have up your Facebook by chance?
No, I don't.
That's all right. We'll get some feedback here. Patricia L. Chavez will give me some feedback, or Wendy. Good morning, Wendy. I'm looking forward to getting together with you this week. But let me give you the link to that study and that Reuters article. And I'm going to blow through a bunch of these links so that I can just get to Jim. USA Today, I think this is going to come up good on the origin of the Black Lives Matter movement. Jim has pointed my attention to the Black Lives Matter app that is now available. I have downloaded that on my phone. Great announcements, great insights, great information. So check that out. Black Lives Matter app on your iPhone or on your Android device. I also want to encourage you to take a look at the June 20th issue of the New Yorker coming out. You will see George Floyd on the cover. It's a close-up examination on this story of the artwork that really embodies the history of violence inflicted upon Black people in America. And so check out this week's New Yorker piece. Let's see, what else do I have for you? On local news, I want to put up a good opportunity for you to engage with the city. I will say that Mayor Keller today will be announcing his public safety department and his new approach for public safety and policing in Albuquerque. We are looking forward to that. There's a story in today's journal. I didn't put up the link to that, but the city is also asking us to put up our favorite balloon fiesta photos. So check that out. That's kind of fun. And in an article that's very important to me and relevant to the Office of the State Auditor, the city of Albuquerque has allowed and asked the residents to weigh in on the 2021 audit plan. So check that out. As we continue to honor the life of and be outraged and having difficult dialogues about the murder of George Floyd, there are many who want us to make sure that we haven't forgotten those who were also lost to violence of similar nature. So Global Citizen has done a good job. Alicia Keys, Cardi B, and others are joining a campaign to seek justice for Breonna Taylor. So let us continue to engage in a broad strokes discussion about the systemic and longstanding violence that the Black community has suffered for many, many years, 400 or so. So I think that is going to do it for me, because I really want to get into a great dialogue, and I think that might be history for me. I mean, we're like at 9:10, just like I was hoping. I've added 5 minutes to our time together here with Jim, and I am very happy about that. Let me give you a little bit of bio about Jim Harvey. Jim, welcome to Cafecito con Colon. I'm thrilled you're here.
Thank you.
All right, so let me see here. We got some. Denise brings up a good point about Black trans and particularly Black transgendered women, again, being invisible and not on the cover. I suspect that it's a difficult balance as an artist to try and communicate a message that touches all, but we continue to hold one another accountable in these conversations, and I think it's a good point. Thank you, Denise. Good morning, Nancy. Good morning, Adrian. I appreciate you being here every morning, and we are glad you are able to join us. So let me let me start out with, I think it'll be a good way to start.
So I think that is going to do it for me, because I really want to get into a great dialogue.
Hold on, Jim. We got multiple screens going here. So let me see. All right, let me tell you about that Jim Harvey that I know and respect, and couldn't be more honored than to have him on Cafecito con Colon. He's an organizational development professional who specializes in services to nonprofit organizations. He came to New Mexico to serve as the state director of volunteer services. Folks, I'm getting some feedback, and I don't know if you are too. And so I'm going to ask you to let me know if you are, because I want a clean recording today. Hey, in the good news department, I'm excited to tell everybody that I have figured out how to download. It's really easy, how to download each of these episodes of Cafecito con Colon so I can move them over to my YouTube channel. So I'll be providing the link to that later this week. I want to say thanks to Alex Vaz for helping me navigate those waters. Jim, can you hear me okay? Let's start with that.
I can hear you perfectly, and there's no echo.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to just plug forward here. So he came out here to work with the Red Cross and served in that role for quite some time, and he had great success there, growing the volunteer enrollment from like 300 to over 1,000. It was amazing. But importantly, during this time in particular, Jim is a public health professional. He's got his master's in public health, if I got that right. And he's been in that sector for almost 4 decades. And he's served in that capacity at the federal, state, and local levels. He's a longtime collector and curator of African and African-American art, and is a member of the Diaspora Rhythms, a Chicago-based society of collectors and educators of art from the African diaspora. So Jim has served on lots of boards, but I most love him because I go to lots of events at the African-American Performing Arts Center, and he is the head of that foundation and of that center for the past like 4 or 5 years. The guy, they just won't let him leave, and I'm very glad.
Well, I just managed to do just that recently, Brian.
Oh, really?
I did finally leave, and the timing couldn't have been better for me because it was at a time when COVID-19 and then George Floyd, the incident with George Floyd came along, and with my new position, my real job at the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice just began to just soak up so much of my time. So, I just set APAC aside for now, but I still hold them close to my heart, and someday I'll wander back in there maybe.
Well, hopefully someday soon. We need you to stay engaged and involved. You've done a great job providing real leadership there, increased programming, increased engagement, increased education. You have just been a tremendous leader with your board there. You have what I call stone soup so often when it comes to nonprofit sector or social profit sector. You have understood that we don't have to have a scarcity mentality, even though resources sometimes feel very limited, that in fact we can have an abundant mentality and have deep impact in the community. You have proven that with your leadership at the African American Performing Arts Center, which is named after our incredible and honored Cheryl Williams Stapleton. So thank you, yes, Jim Harvey, for that leadership. Let me just tell you that now he takes a deep dive in continued engagement in our community as the leader at the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. And Jim has a spouse of more than 2 decades. He's been getting it right. And he's like me. When his wife says, if you're not careful, you'll sleep on the couch, Jim responds the same way I do. It says, honey, it doesn't matter where we sleep tonight. Right, Jim?
You're absolutely right. And he's an incredible actor himself, and is a quadruple threat in this town, I think. He's an incredible performer, singer, actor, dancer, and has really done some remarkable stuff. I was telling him the other night, he played Donkey in Shrek about 5 years ago, and to this day, he walks down the street and people say, hey, weren't you Donkey in Shrek? And so I say, okay, I can't get a break, but he gets them all.
That is awesome, Jim. And He has already told me that he's taking care of the animals this morning because he is a very proud and diligent father to 2 dogs and a cat, if I got that right.
3 dogs and a cat.
Oh, excuse me, 3 dogs and a cat. That sounds like a song in the making.
Right.
Let me just say, I am really thrilled to have you here, Jim. We don't have a deep relationship, but every one of our interactions have been positive and uplifting, and I have watched you from afar with deep admiration. Thank you for your leadership in our city of Albuquerque. We're glad you're here.
I love crossing paths with you everywhere we go because I know that something good is happening.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you. Look, we've got about 45 minutes, and I just want to spend them with you in a way that is enlightening and enriching and informing, as all of us are trying to process things right now and really have a better understanding of the lived experience of the Black community. I think that we have really embraced the idea that it now is a time for us to be listening, to be learning, and so that we can know better, we can do better, and we can be better.
Right.
I think you allow us to do that, Jim. And maybe you just tell us a little bit about your journey to Albuquerque, your passion points, and we're going to listen because we're also going to talk about some things that make this a little bit of a difficult dialogue, because that's when we grow, when we have pain, when we stretch our understanding of the world as we know it. That's when we have growth. So let me grow with you today, Jim.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Let me start out with a little personal privilege and give a shout out to our governor and to the New Mexico Department of Health. Just before we came on, I was looking at the news and I look at the map of COVID-19 cases around the country. And fortunately, Albuquerque is still way down at the bottom in terms of cases. And I think that is a sign of excellent leadership with the governor and excellent engagement with the New Mexico Department of Health. We've had in the Black communities around the state over the past several weeks, we've had an incredible number of testing programs going on. And we can thank Sonia Smith at the health department there for making certain that happens. Hobbs has seen testing, Roswell has seen testing, Las Cruces has seen testing, Albuquerque has certainly seen testing, and it's community-based organizations and churches that have played a major role in making certain that testing is available. And so we've seen a lot of it, and I think that's great work.
Hey, Jim, let me just specifically say Dr. Kunkel and Dr. Scray, she is Dr. Kunkel because I know because we graduated from law school together. She's got her JD, but Secretary Kunkel and Secretary Scrace have done a tremendous job leading, being a voice of calm in just great leadership. If you take a look at the numbers of testing in New Mexico of our 2.1 million folks, we have a huge overrepresentation of testing as it relates to our neighboring states.
That's right.
And I just want to emphasize that point that you made, but that's because of leadership. And early on, our governor said testing was going to be a priority. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And a shout out to the people of the state of New Mexico, because the people have really fallen right in line, and we've all played our part in observing, the stay at home and the safe distance and the mask requirements and the testing. And so, we're there, and we're there because of the fact that we've all come together. And I think that's a good testament to the kind of community we are here in New Mexico. So a little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Chicago, and from the early age of probably 14, I was engaged in politics in Chicago. Interestingly enough, we had
that's a full contact sport in Chicago for
it
sure.
Absolutely is. We believe in voting early and often there.
Oh my goodness.
But we had
election integrity, and vote by mail does not mean vote fraudulently.
That's right.
Safety in elections. Go ahead.
That's right. We've got an incredible mayor there now, and she's already doing some wonderful things, I think. But at the time when I was a teenager, Chicago was really oppressed by a despot of a mayor, Richard J. Daley. What a character he was. And he ran the city like a huge plantation. And so from this very early age of 14, I'd find people who would challenge him and challenge his political machine. And interestingly enough, these were Democrats. But interestingly enough, we would get out there, and I'd support people who would challenge his ward leadership, particularly in the Black community and around the city. And every time he ran for mayor, people who would challenge him, I would get behind them as well. So I was working in political campaigns before I was even old enough to vote. And at that time, the voting age was 21, not 18. So that'll date me in terms of how long ago that probably was. But I was also very much involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, John Lewis's organization, SNCC, and fell into that purely by accident, by getting together with a few of my high school friends. We heard that there was a dance party one night at this church on the south side of Chicago. Let's go to this dance party. So we went to this dance party, and the SNCC Freedom Singers were there. And they were singing songs about the struggle and telling stories about the struggle. I jumped right in. I just got pulled right in. And I've been involved in civil rights ever since.
I love that.
Yeah, ever since. I've just been involved in the civil rights movement.
I posted a great link to SNCC's, well, it was a direct page to John Lewis, but hosted by the SNCCdigital.org. And so just so folks that are not familiar with that part of the history of the civil rights movement and John Lewis's role and your role as being engaged as a young man in that SNCC movement. So thank you for mentioning that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we're coming up on celebrating our 60th anniversary. It was actually supposed to be this year, but because of COVID-19, we've pushed it back to 2021. And that link can be found as well, because we're looking for people coming from all over the country to get together and swap stories and just be glad to see each other that we're still here. So that's going to be quite an event, right?
That is terrific. Let me ask you maybe to lead in a little bit, but for those of us, and we have lots of folks. We have folks that tune in from London, from the Philippines, from all over the world, which is awesome. But I'd love to get a little bit of the texture of what it was like to go from, Chicago, which, what, 32% Black community, with another almost 30% Hispanic community, to coming to New Mexico, where you have an even larger Hispanic community, but maybe somewhere between 2.9 and 3.5% African Americans. I mean, that's a huge change. And all of a sudden, in most rooms you walk into, you are the man of color as it relates to being a Black man.
And that hasn't changed. But it's culture. It's culture. It was culture shock for me. It really was. I arrived here, and one of the first things that I did was I said, let me find the Black community in Albuquerque. And I found that there really was no Black community per se. African Americans live all over the city. And in a certain respect, I think that's a good thing that, we're out and we don't feel relegated to any one particular part of town. But I went to the African American Performing Arts Center about 2 weeks after I got here, because I heard that there was going to be this reception heralding the exhibit of the history of African Americans in New Mexico, which, and here's another shout out to Rita Padrell and the good work that she's done in collecting remarkable historical pieces that take us back to even Blackdom, which was an all-Black town that was formed here back in the 1800s. And so I went looking, and I was disappointed I didn't find very many African Americans at this reception over at APAC at that time, but it didn't deter me. So I kept on looking. And every time I found an opportunity to attach myself to something that Black people were doing here, I would jump right in, and I haven't stopped.
Well, we're glad you haven't stopped. You've been a tremendous advocate and a community ambassador for carrying that message of how important it is for us to understand and embrace and be informed by our history in New Mexico with the African American community. You know, we do a good job, I think, of telling ourselves and telling our story about the multicultural texture, again, of New Mexico with our 2.1 million people. But we, for far too long, I said this on a post last night because I had one of my classmates from Los Lunas clap back at me when I posted, and yes, I've got an overrepresentation of posts that relate to the current affairs that we're in based on the murder of George Floyd. Yeah. And I've been hosting these Black Voices now for 2 weeks, and thank you for joining me, Jim. But can you speak a little bit to what's uncomfortable for us to think about? Because I think that while we celebrate the multicultural community that is New Mexico, I, for one, have not taken the time to really understand the lived experience of that 2.9 or 3.5% of people in New Mexico who are Black and what that experience is like, because it's not comfortable to talk about it. And
sure.
And I am better informed today than I was yesterday, and tomorrow I'll be better informed than I am today, but I will always try and do what I can to be a better ally. And I think I can do that if you help inform that way of thinking for me.
Well, you know, one of the things that stands out to me historically here, that was a painful piece of history was, all right, we had an all-Black town called Blackdom. And for it to come into existence at a time when, you know, what we're seeing now was multiplied tenfold in terms of discrimination around the country, New Mexico was no exception. And there were people who were opposed to the existence of Blackdom, particularly those folks down in Roswell, you know, who diverted the water, the flow of water from that town. And Blackdom died primarily because of a lack of water. But it was a thriving town and probably could have emerged as another Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And what happened, you know, was pretty much the same thing. The town was destroyed. Now, nothing was as devastating as Tulsa in 1921 was, but at the same time, all the work that had been put in, you know, died to discrimination, you know, systemic discrimination, just systemic racism that destroyed the town of Blackdom. And so as African Americans here, as a small percentage that we are, I'm reminded that we've achieved a lot despite that kind of history here in New Mexico. You know, there have been some pretty interesting institutions that have come into existence, you know, over the years, representing representing Black people and the African American interest. And again, if you look at APAC, the African American Performing Arts Center alone, you know, how many other states with a population as small as ours, as in terms of African Americans, how many other states can boast of having an institution like that? And I can say not very many. So it's a testament to the strength and the determination of the African Americans and people that support the African American community that has helped make the difference here.
Which, by the way, Jim, I just want to say that there was a great performance this past weekend. I think it was on Friday night. I tuned in to the programming for the African American Performing Arts Center. I'm going to post a link now to the center so that folks can tune in to the showtime at the African American Performing Arts Center. Robert Gibson did a great job, and it led with really a great story that I didn't know about a boxer in New Mexico history. But anyway, make sure you tune into that Performing Arts Center programming. It's virtual, it's online, it's easy, and it's free.
Good stuff keeps happening. Good stuff keeps happening. Yeah.
Indeed. Tell me a little bit about, let me say this tactfully. You're a seasoned man, Jim, right? You've seen a lot. You've seen a lot. And as a man who has not just seen and lived it, but has become an expert in curating the history of the African American experience, Help us look through your lens today. Tell us what you think would inform our lives as we try and embrace the opportunity to be better allies in light of the murder of George Floyd and everything that we've seen leading up to it.
I was in a discussion Saturday night with a group of Black brothers and sisters here. And one of the things that I talked about was my frustration with the failure of my generation to institutionalize the experiences and the history of our struggle in this country. We did not do a good job of that. Once some barriers were removed, or so we thought, what we did was we just went on about our business and began to enjoy the fruits of our labor, so we thought. Little did we know that there was still so much work that needed to be done, and that in the face of that work that needed to be done, we needed to stop, take a deep breath, write our history down, and make certain that our families, in fact, would teach it. And so we didn't do those things. And a lot of the value and the instruction that comes from a history of struggle has been not necessarily lost, but it's been relegated to archives, and most folks don't know where to look for it. As a result of that, things have come back, they've come full circle. This is probably our third iteration in my lifetime, of what I see as really the same struggle. Police violence, for example, is not new in the Black community. It's been around for quite a long time. But when we talk about institutional racism, sure, police violences and police murders, are probably the most prominent because of the fact that, we're talking about something that's very final, life-ending. And now that it's televised, it's recorded, it's reported on a regular basis, more people are seeing it. However, you've got the more subtle types of institutional racism. Our public school system here in Albuquerque and in other places faces a huge number of challenges in terms of how you handle Black kids. We need restorative justice programs in the public school system here. We need a better balance in terms of representation of African American and African history being taught in the schools, so that kids understand who they are, where they've come from, what the struggle has represented, and it'll help them develop a roadmap in terms of where they need to go. We've got, you talked about healthcare and what Lovelace was doing to Native American women. Well, look at the statistics of Black women dying in childbirth in healthcare. We've got to address that. The healthcare system, health professionals disregard far too often proclamations of other kinds of ailments and illnesses when it comes to Black women when they're involved in childbirth, and they end up dying because we're taken for granted, we're overlooked, we're relegated to being less than important. Employment continues to, there's still huge discrimination in employment. And I can go on and on. Institutional racism lives in all the institutions. And I think that the mistake that we have made, but I think that we're learning now, is that we cannot expect those institutions that have been created for the purpose of oppressing us and suppressing us to be the same institutions that will protect us. Those institutions need to be radically changed. And starting with the police departments around the country, that's where we need to begin. But that is certainly not where it needs to end.
And I think, Dr. Ibram Kendi has done such a great job. I could listen to that professor speak for hours on end. And for those of you that don't know Dr. Kendi, he's been an amazing voice during this time, at least for me. about how it's no longer okay to be to be able to be comfortable and believe that you're not a racist. It is now time for us all to be anti-racist and anti-racism, and that is a big difference. He started out by, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago, writing a book called Stamped from the Beginning, which was a huge National Book Award winner for nonfiction. I think he was the youngest at the time to receive that award in the award's history. And he has since written a couple, at least one other book, but I think 2 other books. And he is a professor at American. He set up the, I think it's called the Institute for Anti-Racism or something like that. And just I mean, I could just listen to him speak forever, just like Jim Harvey. I mean, don't be confused, Jim. I could listen to you speak forever too, even though I've interrupted you now twice.
It's okay.
You know Dr. Kendi, right? You follow.
I do, yeah. And
you validate him?
I'm a big fan, big fan. And we need more Dr. Kendis, we do. Because again, we've got another opportunity here to make up for lost time in terms of the education or the re-education that needs to happen in our community, for one. But you know, when I first started work at the Center for Peace and Justice, I was invited to sit in on a committee that was meeting, and it's a committee on racism. And the committee on racism is a bunch of white folks who are sitting around and they're talking about their role, their responsibility in addressing racism, getting in touch with themselves first, and then also being spokespersons in white communities about, you know, how you respond to racism and how you turn people's minds around, if at all possible, about their racist attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And they asked me to come in and sit in. And I said, okay, I'm going to sit in, but you know what? I'm going to sit in for just 5 minutes. And that is to tell you a little bit about me. And I'll end with encouraging you to continue to do the work that you're doing, because the work that you're doing is so important in your community. They got it, and they continue to do that work. And so that's what needs to happen. But for African Americans, we have a lot of catching up to do ourselves. And again, probably one of the biggest struggles I was involved in the 60s, and it continues to this day, was getting African and African American history introduced into the public school system in Chicago. And I led a group, and we did something called Black Mondays. And every Monday for about 10 weeks, Black students would stay out of the schools, would stay home, and we'd have rallies and teach-ins all around the city instead, where we'd learn about African and African American history. And, you know, I've got this picture that I'll probably put up at some point, which is of us having this massive march from the Afro Arts Theater to our office, the Umoja Black Student Center. There were probably 3,000 kids. We were all kids in those days. 3,000 kids marching from that theater to the office as a way of again, emphasizing the importance of knowing who we are. Because if you don't know who you are, you're not going to know where you're going. And so that was really an important thing. And to this day, we're seeing now that school systems, a lot of school systems around the country, Texas is a perfect example, you know, they're removing our very existence from the public school system, taking stuff out. Albuquerque needs to play catch up in terms of making certain that good information is included, you know, and I'm talking about much more information than just Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. He had so much more to say. He had so many more experiences to share, as did so many other people in the struggle. That's the kind of education that needs to happen. And I can only talk about that because of the fact that I'm old enough to have lived it.
Yes, I think I said seasoned.
Seasoned. I like that. I'm going to use that one.
You should. Hey, I think that's great. And I think just like in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, I can tell you that I'm calling on my tribal members, and that is those who are members of the tribe of the Jewish community. Those of us that are in New Mexico and grew up at B'nai Israel like me, or Temple Albert, or Nahalat Shalom, all of these communities, you know, we have a historical context for standing tall with the African American community.
That's right.
As Jewish people. And
That's right.
I want to remind us of that. And I want to encourage a dialogue. And as you may know, Jim, at the Holocaust and Intolerance Museum, we have, particularly for the last year at least, have had an exhibit in the Holocaust Museum that begins to tell some of the story of the 400 years of history of persecution and mistreatment and violence against the Black community. But I will just say this, that as you continue the dialogue about bringing that African American education into our classrooms of New Mexico in all 33 counties, I think we have a different conversation going on in the Jewish community, saying, look, we need Holocaust education and intolerance education in the classroom as well. But we're over here on one side of the room and you're over there on the other side of the room. And what we need to do is do like we did, and that is come together. And I think that I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's a perfect opportunity for us to say, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a scarcity mentality and approach. It is an abundance mentality to be able to say we need that African American history and we need that Holocaust and intolerance education in the classrooms, and we should be standing shoulder to shoulder like we did in the marches of the 50s and the 60s, where the Jewish community and the Black community stood together to make progress.
Our history, particularly our history of the civil rights struggle, you know, are so intertwined. They really are. And when I think about Goodman and Cheney, Goodman and Schwerner, for example, down in Mississippi, you know, 2 Jewish boys killed struggling for civil rights for African Americans. You know, I mean, that says a lot. But there's so much more of that kind of history, and I think that history needs to be taught, you know, collectively as well. I'm also happy to know that the Holocaust Museum has embraced the genocide of almost 20 million Congolese at the hands of the Belgians, you know, in Africa. That was a huge Holocaust, and the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. has begun to research and dig more. And as a result of the information that I've seen so far, I don't look so very kindly on Belgium as a country, because that's a country that has not atoned for that atrocity, you know, as Germany has in so many ways. So our journeys are in so many ways so similar, and that should never get lost.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for saying it that way. And when you talk about that atonement, I think Dr. Kendi also speaks to, or maybe it was one of his colleagues. I'm sorry, I might be confusing I've tried to listen to so many voices over the last 2 weeks that they're all conflating, right? But and again, check out the Oprah special, 2 nights. I'll try and find the link again to post that. Super awesome. Over, I think, 11 million people tuned in each night, 11 or 14 million people tuned in each night. She's got it hosted on her own network, the Oprah Winfrey Network. Check that out. It wasn't Kendi. It wasn't Dr. Kendi. It was another gentleman who actually spoke to this situation in the context of religion and atonement and repentance for what he called the original sin, which is the snatching of children and tearing apart of families and bringing those individuals to this country, which was the founding. And so I thought that was fascinating. And I do think that this is where the conversation on my Facebook page became slightly confrontational, with a gentleman that I've known my entire life, young man I graduated with. But, actually owning our history and owning our understanding what systems are in place as a result of that original snatching, that original sin, and that original tearing apart of families and treating Black women and men like property to found this country. And until we can recognize that, embrace that, those of us that grew up talking about being colorblind, as I said, after I'm now more informed, that same color blindness is what has done a disservice to the African American community.
That's right.
Because we think we're colorblind and everything is rosy because we've never engaged a Jim Harvey and say, what's your lived experience? Does my color blindness actually operate as an impediment to my ability to have a better and real understanding of the lived experience of African American men and women who have to talk to their children about the 10 steps necessary to employ in order to stay alive when you've been pulled over by an officer?
I read a couple of days ago a comment by the not so bright Senate Majority Leader McConnell, Moscow Mitch, I call him, where he said that that white America had atoned for its sins by electing Barack Obama president of the United States. And nothing could be farther from correct or true in that here we've got evidence, clear evidence that we're far, far, far away from any realization, that the original sin has been atoned for. All the oppression, all the racism that we continue to experience now. Atlanta, Georgia, just 3 nights ago, Rashard Brooks shot in the back twice while running away from the police. You can't ignore that, and it's just disgusting. And what it is it's post-slavery racism still being expressed and carried out, by white America in this country. So the original sin has not been atoned for. In fact, things are getting far worse. And that's why I say we've got so much work to do and still so very far to go.
And it's complicated, especially in New Mexico, as we have this conversation. And I appreciate that, Jim, and I validate it 100%. We have so much work to do here in New Mexico. But it's so complicated because while as I've done the last 2 weeks on Cafecito con Colon, I want to make sure that we seize this moment in time when the rainbow of stakeholders are actually engaging and listening and understanding the importance of the message and the work of Black Lives Matter for the last 6 years, which did not have that same rainbow response that you and I talked about before we came to camera. But that rainbow response is a powerful opportunity, and we've got to seize on it. While at the same time, as Chris Larrañaga in the comments section has said, look, we have the Indian Removal Act by Jackson, and we have in New Mexico this particular and deep history that goes even further in some ways that we can't forget about, and that same marginalization, those same atrocities also happen to our Native American communities, our indigenous communities. And I think I certainly find it difficult to try and be appropriate with the balance. While I care deeply about both those journeys and want to be best informed about those journeys, it is complicated and we have a lot of work to do.
The urgency, of balanced and genuine responses, is okay. It's being carried out in the African American community, certainly with all these police murders and so many other things. But I also think, as I was listening to you, there is no excuse for the Navajo Nation to be suffering at COVID-19 the way it is. There's no excuse for African Americans to be contracting and dying disproportionately from COVID-19 here and any place and all around the country. Again, it's discrimination, it's racism at its absolute worst. And so when you begin to talk about dismantling—
And it is institutional. Let's talk about that just a second, right? The idea that most New Mexicans didn't know that Native American community, the Navajo Nation, is still struggling to get running water to their families, right, is a shock to people.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about what resources they got and whether those resources were deployed quickly in the Navajo Nation as they were in the rural and urban communities of New Mexico, particularly the urban communities in New Mexico, from the federal government. I mean, it just didn't happen. And until we start really recognizing their sovereignty and having government-to-government conversations from the federal delegations and the presidency, the president's office, we will continue to have this disparity and this overrepresentation of the traumatic effect and impact of COVID-19. And nationally, I just want to say, Jim, I appreciate you shining that spotlight here in New Mexico. But nationally, when we look at the impact of COVID-19 on the African American community, on Black lives in this country, we again have that overrepresentation. Why? Because of the systemic gaps that we have in a lack of access to public health, lack of access to resources, the poverty rates. There's going to be a definite connection between poverty and the contracting of COVID-19. I mean, it's remarkable, but at least we're having the conversation, and now we have enlightened those in positions of power as to how this systemic, racism impacts us even in public health.
Sure. I think that all the events that are happening around the country right now are bringing us to a point where we're beginning to pay more attention and hopefully begin to ask the essential question, why? And then coming together to talk about solutions. And if we begin to focus on the why and the solutions, I think this country has a chance. If we don't do those things, then we're missing, and we'll be right back here again in another 25 years or so.
Well, let's make sure that that's not our legacy. I certainly am committed to making sure it's not my legacy for my part, and with people like you to continue to guide us, inform us, and better educate us. I think that it won't have to be our legacy. Things can change, and we can.
I agree wholeheartedly. I do. The Center for Peace and Justice is also in the middle of sponsoring a contest right now, where we're inviting artists to come in and paint a mural. We've got a wall in the back of the building, and we want a mural, a tribute to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and as many more as we can get on that mural. So we're running a competition right now to get people to submit their samples of work, and we'll pay them a nice reward, pay for the supplies for them to do the work, and we're hoping that by the end of the summer we're going to have a new mural up.
I love that. Can we make sure that we contemplate and ask the artists that are commissioned to contemplate, what Denise mentioned earlier, which is, the violence against the trans community, trans Black community, particularly trans women of color, is somehow not invisible in this piece of work.
I completely agree. The mural that we have up right now does speak to that. But
I just posted that, just so you know.
Great, thank you. Thank you. The one we have up now does speak to the violence against the trans community, but there's so much more that needs to be done. Just before coming on, I heard that the Supreme Court had ruled on the employment case, and that transgender people as well are included in protections under the Civil Rights Act. So I'm really excited about that. But there's so much more that needs to be said, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and thank Denise for that as well. we'll see to it that the trans community, particularly transgendered people of color, need to be more prominently discussed, because here again, we've got a real challenge, and that is that trans people of color continue to get murdered and assaulted at alarming rates around the country, and nobody seems to be talking about it. Well, we need to do more.
Thank you. Thank you. Tell us, I want to spend the last few minutes, I think, giving you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice, although I'm probably going to have you back to do an entire episode of Cafecito con Colon as soon as I shift from Black Voices. And although I can't tell you when that's going to be, because it seems to me like
this will be here for a while.
Yeah, I think we're going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
When I first started, I said we're going to do the next week, and now I'm at 2 weeks, and I feel like I've already scheduled tomorrow. We've got Hakeem Bellamy, I think, coming on, and so many great Black voices this week. So I think we're going to be going for a couple of weeks, but I do want to have you back specifically to speak about the work of the Center for Peace and Justice. But can you give us a kind of the 30,000-foot mission and vision of the work and the center?
Well, the center is an umbrella organization dedicated to just that, peace and justice. And as an umbrella organization, we brought many different groups in, Veterans for Peace and anti-nuclear and anti-war organizations, civil rights organizations, Jewish Voices for Peace is involved there. This just 50 groups roughly make up what we call the Pajola Collective, and that's the peace and justice organizations around the city. Many of them meet there, and we're hoping that when things get lifted so we can, they'll come back to meeting again. And we push out position papers, plan direct action around critical issues, and do what we can to educate the community about critical issues of the day, as well as historic issues. And we've been around for 35 years. And I tell you, some of our volunteers to this day, have been around for a hell of a lot longer than 35 years, and they're still there. We've got people that volunteer that are in their 90s.
Wow.
And they believe, they're committed, they're dedicated, and it makes a huge difference in terms of what we do. So right now, we're in the middle of responses to COVID-19. We're going to soon introduce testing in the Nob Hill area. We feed the homeless and hungry in our community every Saturday morning. And we're also beginning to offer a safe space to the Black Lives Matter organizers to come and hold meetings and use it as a launch pad for many of the activities. We had a vigil 3 weeks ago on a Sunday. We expected 300 people. We had 2,000 people coming out to respond to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and on. And the speakers were great. The commitment was great. And so I'm just proud of what we've been able to do. And I'm looking forward to us being able to do a lot more going forward.
Well, I appreciate that so much. And that's a great overview of the tremendous and impactful work that you're doing. Yes, that protest vigil was phenomenal. And I know we're having them all over the state. I spoke at one down in Valencia County, my hometown, Los Lunas, on Friday night, and there were several more over the weekend. We had our virtual or unofficial Gay Pride Month celebration with a parade, I think on Saturday. I just appreciate you being able to engage the stakeholders in these meaningful conversations and providing a safe space for the conversations to actually take place. And I have been there often, and I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for the work of the Center for Peace and Justice here in Albuquerque. And I'm honored to have been able to get to know you a little bit better today. I want to turn the last couple minutes as we wrap up here, Jim, just over to you about maybe, I know you didn't get to share your pictures. You have so much to talk about in terms of Black history, as opposed to the Black moment that we're having now to ensure that this is a watershed. Like I've said before, I don't want this to be a flashpoint. I want it to be a tipping point for engagement and thus never looking back. And are there a couple items you wanted to share with us today that I didn't give you an opportunity to. Time is always feeling so short in these 45 minutes, but I want to kind of turn it over to you and give you an opportunity to have the space.
Well, this has been a great opportunity, and let me just say that the Center for Peace and Justice needs money.
I posted the link. I posted the donate link.
Thank you, because we can use funds when we haven't been able to rent our space out like we normally do because of COVID-19. So that means the revenues are down. So anything that anybody can send us will be heartily welcome. But I just want to say that as we move forward, we need to continue to move forward in the spirit of unity. Yeah, I mentioned that rainbow response to the current events that are happening now, and that continues to happen. Has to continue to happen. If we're going to break down institutional racism, we've got to do it, but we have to do it together. And I'm just happy to see so many Black voices stepping forward and taking leadership and seizing the narrative, because that's important as well. That the narrative doesn't get lost, that the complexion of the narrative doesn't get overlooked, but the work continues, and we have to do that as a collective.
Well, that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you for adding to the complexion and the tapestry that is beautiful of New Mexico. Let us continue to engage in difficult dialogues, uncomfortable stories about how even in our beautiful land of enchantment, overt racism and acts of violence are happening against Black men and women in our state. And it is now the time to say no more. Enough is enough. And I think that, I think it was Kathy McGill who early on in this series made a statement that is just awesome. And she said, enough's enough of saying there's not enough when it comes to the African-American community and its need for resources, whether it be the cabinet level position or the Office of African-American Affairs, or whether it be making sure that we have a New Mexico African-American History Museum, or enough is enough of saying there's not enough when it comes to the African-American community in New Mexico. So let us continue to have that dialogue, and we will always engage you, Jim Harvey. You are always welcome on Cafecito con Colon. We are grateful for you making New Mexico your home, coming in from Chicago, where 1 out of 3 people are a person who looks like you when they look in the mirror, to a place where only 1 in 33 of you look in the mirror and see a Black man or a Black woman or a Black person who is transgendered. And we want to say thank you for continuing to make a difference and adding to the complexity of this conversation. And I always invite you to call on me anytime. I appreciate you, Jim Harvey. I love you, and I am grateful that you came on Cafecito con Colon today.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it and look forward to us getting together again.
We will do so. We will do so. Folks, tomorrow, Hakeem Bellamy, Poet Laureate, an incredible community engagement specialist, will be on, and I can't wait to host him. And then Wednesday, we will be on hiatus. I've got to go dark on Wednesday because I have to take my surrogate mom for an appointment for her good health and continued success. And so I won't be on Wednesday, and then back on Thursday. And then I think Friday, I've also got another conflict. This is a complicated week for me because Friday I will be at a funeral to honor Frank Gallegos, one of my mentors on my journey. And so I won't be able to host on Friday either. So tomorrow will be a big show. Today was a big show. It's been an incredible journey of bringing Black voices to Cafecito con Colon the last 2 weeks, and we will continue this dialogue. And for now, I just want to tell New Mexico, I love you. Thank you for being my extrovert therapist. Thank you for joining me on Cafecito con Colon. And thanks to Jim Harvey for being such a leader in our community and being a strong voice. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow with Hakeem Bellamy. Bye-bye.